Hey folks, welcome back. Before we begin, I want to share a quick content warning. This video discusses grooming and childhood abuse in an educational way. I won't be sharing graphic details, but if this topic feels heavy for you, I would encourage you to take care of yourself and step away. I know this is a lot. Today, I want to talk about what grooming really looks like, because it almost never looks like what people expect. Bravehearts.org defines grooming as the preparatory stage of child sexual abuse that offenders use to gain trust and compliance of the child or young person and those around them, and to establish secrecy and silence to avoid disclosure. And here's the part that matters most about that. Grooming is a process. Grooming is slow, it's subtle, and that's why so many survivors don't recognize it or didn't recognize it when it was happening. The first part of grooming is victim selection, the big why me question if you're a victim like I was. Perpetrators don't choose children at random. They often look for children who are trusting of adults, lacking confidence or self-esteem, isolated or lonely, that are not closely protected by safe adults, or who are dependent on them for care, guidance, or approval. It's really important to remember that all children are vulnerable. There's no type of family that is immune to abuse. For many survivors, the danger doesn't come from a stranger. It comes from somebody who is already supposed to be safe. In my case, the person who groomed me was my father. And that changes everything about how grooming works. When a parent is the perpetrator, trust isn't built, it's assumed. From birth, we're taught that our parents are safe, loving, and deserving of our obedience. There's no framework for questioning that built into our upbringing. I grew up in a household where authority was absolute, where family loyalty was emphasized above all else. I was taught that personal matters stay inside the family and they're not discussed with outsiders. And so this created a world where secrecy felt normal and silence felt virtuous. Isolation wasn't dramatic either. It was very gradual. Family members who challenged the status quo or called out inappropriate behavior were pushed away. Outside voices were framed as dangerous or untrustworthy or as trying to drive the family apart. And over time, our world became very small. Once trust exists, the next step is access and isolation. Grooming, of course, requires opportunity. So for perpetrators, they create situations where they can be alone with the child and reduce the chances of being questioned. They manipulate family dynamics, they create excuses, and frame isolation as care or concern. In my home, this often looked like late night talks or one-on-one time that was framed as emotional support or guidance, father to daughter. Other adults in the household were pushed away, and they were made to feel like they were interfering with these dynamics. And what was especially damaging to this dynamic was that it created tension between my parents. My mother was continually confused and hurt by what to her appeared to be this really strong closeness that her husband had with her daughter. And she was legitimately jealous of this relationship that she believed that we had. And that confusion was part of that manipulation. And her being jealous created a barrier between us that limited our ability to communicate with each other as well. In my home, no one was being protected, everyone was being divided, and that was being done very intentionally. Isolation is one of the strongest tools of the groomer because without witnesses, the child has no comparison point for what is normal. And they also have no one else to step in to potentially interfere or stop the behavior from happening. Grooming almost always includes trust building behaviors. Groomers are often very charming or well liked. They often hold positions of respect or authority. They give special attention and they're given special attention for their roles. They're showing favoritism to their victims. They often offer gifts or privileges to their victims. They create that special bond, that special relationship. And they're often presented as loving, caring, or protective instead of what is actually happening, which is very harming. In conversations with survivors, this is one of the many areas that people often struggle to reconcile with later because some of what they do to us feels good. It feels like being chosen, being valued, understood, we're important, we're given all this special attention and care, and it makes it feel like we're getting something good and that we just have to put up with this bad behavior in return. My father presented himself as a deeply religious, upright man to the community around him. In public spaces, he was often viewed as a leader or a role model, leading church projects and community events that put him on a pedestal. But at home, the reality was very different. For me, he gave me special attention and privileges that the other children didn't receive. I was allowed to stay up later. I was included in adult conversations, sometimes very adult conversations. I was given inappropriate attention. I was being praised for being mature and responsible. And at the time, a lot of that attention felt like love. It felt like connection, like I was important. It felt like being special as my father would confide in me and I would be his confidant. Only later did I understand that it was also conditioning, and the emotional attachment becomes a powerful hook and a way to make your victim very loyal so that we're less likely to say something to hurt that person. And then there's boundary testing and desensitization. Grooming doesn't jump straight into harm. It's a series of very small steps to get there. And these steps can include things like inappropriate conversations, sharing adult problems with a child, teaching distorted ideas about bodies and relationships and boundaries, confusing physical affection. It can be making the child responsible for adult problems, but it's not all at once. It's all in very tiny steps so that they're so small that the child doesn't think this is abuse or this is wrong. They think this is just how things are. In my experience, boundaries were slowly blurred. Topics that should never be discussed with a child were talked about as if they were normal. I was exposed to adult information and emotional burdens far beyond my age. And so, what made this especially confusing was the contradictions. On one hand, there's these strict religious rules that were being taught about purity and obedience and not doing XYZ things with a boyfriend or a lover. But on the other hand, behavior that violated these very rules was happening by my father. And as a child, I didn't think this is abuse. It was that this is really complicated, or dad just made a mistake, or I must be misunderstanding, or this might be my fault somehow. Of course, he helped with that messaging as well. So, how do you deal with that as you're a child? You don't know. And even when the harm occurs, the grooming continues, it never stops. Perpetrators work very hard to maintain their silence. They may apologize and then demand that you forgive them. They may frame what happened as love, a weakness, or a mistake that must never be mentioned again. It's a secret. Perpetrators may ask the children to keep those secrets for them. They may tell them that no one would understand or that no one will believe them. They may apologize and demand forgiveness. They may claim that it was actually love or care, not harm. They may make the child feel like it's their fault somehow, that they're responsible for the abuse. They may also use fear, guilt, or loyalty to keep them in line and to keep their mouths shut. And they often suggest that disclosure would destroy the family. In my case, I was told growing up that forgiveness meant never mentioning it again. My father would put on these big dramatic apologies, and then he would tell me that remembering it after he apologized was wrong, that I had to be silent as proof of my acceptance of his forgiveness and as proof of faith, that any questioning or bringing it up again was a betrayal. I was made to feel responsible for preserving peace in the family. My father's motto growing up for all of us was keep it in the family, which meant we never shared or exposed our issues, regardless of what they were, to anyone outside of him. In my opinion, this is one of the cruelest parts of grooming. The child is being taught that they must protect the person who is harming them at the detriment of themselves, almost a sacrifice to ensure peace around them. And this is how silence is created. For many survivors, the abuse at some point ends, but the manipulation never does. In my case, after a very poorly run CPS investigation at the age of 10, my father used that as a very strong manipulation tactic, regularly telling me that he'd been investigated by CPS and law enforcement and that he was not a threat, quote unquote. For years, the message I heard as a child was essentially that there was no use reporting anything because when someone had tried, he was able to convince CPS that nothing was wrong. And that no one cared about me enough to stop the bad behavior. It's really important to remember that survivors don't miss the grooming because they're naive or weak. Survivors miss it because they were children. Children are trained to trust adults, to want approval, to depend on their caregivers or people of authority. Children also lack the language to explain manipulation and what's happening to them oftentimes. And there's a strong fear of losing love or for breaking the family. When grooming is wrapped in religion or authority, family roles, and affection, it becomes nearly invisible from the inside. And so it looks very obvious from the outside, especially maybe after the fact, feels confusing and normal from the inside for those victims. I wish people understood that grooming is not a dramatic thing. It's very relational, it's very psychological, and it's very slow. And I want you to understand that survivors don't need to be asked, why didn't you say something? Instead, they need to be told, it makes sense why you didn't. Because when a child's whole world is built on trust and obedience, speaking up feels impossible. For parents, caregivers, and communities, it's really important for you to understand what grooming looks like. Watch out for things like adults that seek exclusive time with specific children. Watch out for things like secrecy or special privileges, or things like that that might seem off. Watch out for isolation from peers and family. Blurred emotional boundaries or physical boundaries is another big one, and sudden changes in a child's behavior. Grooming thrives in silence and secrecy, and it weakens when there's a light shined upon it. Your awareness could save lives. If you're a survivor watching this, please know that what happened to you was not your fault. You were responding the way a child responds, with trust and survival in mind. Putting language to these experiences is not about blaming ourselves, but what it is, it's about understanding and allowing us to be compassionate to ourselves. And it's about prevention to make sure that we are aware and others are aware if it's happening to someone else. If this helped you see something more clearly for yourself or someone you love, then this has done its job. You are not alone. Your story makes sense, and your healing really matters. I realize that this video may bring up difficult emotions, and I want to make sure you know that support resources are linked below in case you need them. Take care of yourself. I know it's a lot. Thank you for being here with me. I'm Janae Cherie, and I hope that my story helps you to tell yours. If this content supports your healing, subscribing helps me keep creating more of it. Thank you.